Today's show is sponsored by Panoptica. Panoptica provides users with deep visibility, prioritized risk assessment, and actionable remediation from development to runtime. This comprehensive cloud-native application protection platform provides an essential, holistic view to secure the entire cloud application stack seamlessly. With the integration of security into the DevOps and CI/CD pipelines, Panoptica fosters a security-first culture and allows users to detect and resolve security issues at every stage of the development lifecycle. To get more information on Panoptica, visit panoptica.app. That's panoptica.app.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another Sunday Perspective show as October begins to hit the other side of October, the second half of October. Gosh, there are only like 2 months left in the year. It's amazing. It feels like the year went by really, really fast. Hope everybody's doing well wherever you are on this side of the world, that side of the world. Today's show, I wanted, the last couple of weeks Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a scalable, full-stack monitoring platform. Datadog Synthetic Monitoring enables you to detect front-end errors and performance errors by analyzing user sessions and receiving actionable alerts. API tests help you detect and debug user-facing issues in critical endpoints and applications. Build and deploy self-maintaining browser tests to simulate user journeys from global locations. Start proactively monitoring your user experience today with a free 14-day trial of Datadog by visiting datadog.com/frontend-cloudcast. That's datadog.com/frontend-cloudcast. Are you getting pressure from finance to justify or reduce your cloud bill? CloudZero is the only cloud cost platform loved by engineers and trusted by finance. CloudZero can identify unused, idle, or over-provisioned resources, alert you to spend anomalies, and organize 100% of your spend into a framework that mirrors your business structure, like cost per customer, product feature, or team. It's the most powerful platform ever built to provide accurate, granular visibility into your total cloud spend without the typical pitfalls of legacy cloud cost management tools like endless tagging or clunky Kubernetes support. Manage cost, optimize development, and maximize profit all in one platform. Join companies like Rapid7, Drift, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. Visit today to experience immediate and ongoing savings on your cloud bill. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to kind of dive into some thoughts I've had and really almost ask open-ended questions to the community of what are you seeing around technology business models, specifically software-centric business models that are working? Where are we seeing them, have struggles? Where are they breaking down and failing? And I was kind of motivated to look at this because of a couple things that happened. The first one was an area that I personally don't really get into very much. I know Aaron gets into it somewhat, and I know a lot of people in the community are into it, is gaming. And there was an activity or an event that went on last few weeks, maybe month or so. A company called Unity, who makes one of the gaming engines for software developers, for game developers, the Unity engine, decided to change their pricing model. And so, gaming is a huge part of the technology industry. It can feel like a niche if you're not really part of it. But, if you start to wade into those waters, you realize that there are billions and billions of dollars not only spent in making games, but also in people playing games, consuming games, interacting with each other. Here in the Raleigh area, Epic is a huge footprint, beginning to grow quite a bit. And so Unity, the company, one of the largest gaming engines, decided to change their pricing model. And they changed it from being somewhat ad supported. So they had a model that, as I understand it, was more driven by, in-game purchases. So anybody who's played games, whether it's with your kids or you play them themselves, are familiar with in-game purchases. And they changed it, and I don't know if they entirely changed it, but they partially changed it to one in which they were going to charge game developers on a per download basis. And so this created a huge stir in the industry, created a huge backlash towards Unity, the company, to the point where essentially they looked at the company as being such, the leadership of the company as being such bad stewards of the overall model and not understanding the economics of their community and so forth, that they fired their CEO. And actually, the person who's taking over, at least as the temporary CEO, is the former Red Hat CEO, Jim Whitehurst. So that kind of got my attention, just having worked with Jim in the past. But it did get me thinking about kind of all the changes that are going on in the industry, or at least, bumps in the road that we've been seeing around software models. So obviously, we've seen, there's there's forever the old statement that open source is not a business model. We've forever heard people say, well, there'll never be another Red Hat, sort of the idea of all software that's created by the company remains open source. So the commercial product is the same as the open source product, that sort of thing. So we'll sort of leave that to the side. But we've seen more and more, at least in this domain that we live in, where people are trying a couple of different models, right? There's still companies that are VC backed, that are doing open source, that a lot of them eventually become sort of open core. And we've seen mixed reviews about that. I saw an interesting article, sort of a keynote agenda, if you will, from the folks that create Wasm that we've had on the show recently. I forget, Matt Butcher, who has been leading a lot of the Wasm work. And he basically was just being very rational and saying, hey, look, we very much as a company support open source, but we also realize that in order to maintain viability as a company and continue to drive innovation in open source, engineers have to get paid, and the company needs to make enough money to be able to support engineers and be able to do innovation. And so he was making a very rational sort of claim for their approach, which was going to be based on open core. And he basically just said, like, there will be lots of stuff that is very usable as open source, but the things that we're driving new innovation for will oftentimes be, held back as, monetized things or open core. Now, I didn't get that exactly right. He didn't say, only the good stuff will stay with us. But that was, it was him just trying to make a very rational, not after the fact statement that that's the direction they were going. And, as the leader of a new framework around WebAssembly, he was trying to get ahead of it. And I think he was trying to do the sort of, not the thing that Docker had done, which was get so big that, and then constantly say, well, we're not really sure what our monetization model is, and then be stuck. Right. They were trying to sort of get ahead of it and say, look, as a company that happens to be leading this movement, this is sort of where we're going. And I just want to signal to the community, this is where we're going. And that's fine. Right. People have their opinions about open core. A lot of it boils down to, trust and all sorts of things. But it feels like there's a lot going on in software these days, especially around business models, that really boil down to sort of trust. And the idea that if you start out with one business model, regardless of how successful it is, regardless of whether or not you're able to grow in the early days at the pace that you want to, the idea that you have built something that you're not going to change in the future seems to be kind of at the center of a lot of these discussions, right? And that's a difficult thing to do, because we, for a long time, have basically said, well, in order to grow something to be large enough to be able to get people's attention now in the world in which there's so much technology going on, there's so many options that are out there. You have to get big fast. You have to grow fairly fast, and in order to do that, you're doing a lot of marketing without having a revenue stream, right? You're letting a lot of people try it. You're letting communities build around things. You're letting word of mouth spread, and in order to do that, you sort of need access to a lot of fairly cheap money. And we're, now sort of in a stage like we have in all economies, in which access to cheap money is not nearly as prevalent, right? We've talked about the fact that there's really only been like one major IPO over the last, 18 to 20 months or so. There's no really big ones on the horizon. So the exits for certain companies that had been taking a lot of VC money has sort of gone away. And so, we're in a situation in which, the economics are sort of changing. We've seen enough situations. You could pull up the HashiCorp Terraform situation, which they changed the licensing. We've seen some other companies over the last year or two change their licensing. So we know that is an area in which, sort of guessing at what your plan will be in the future, or not really having a plan, but then assuming that, well, we'll figure out monetization in the future is is having some very negative feedback or blowback from communities, right? Again, whether it was Unity or Terraform, HashiCorp with Terraform, or, we've seen this with Elastic, right, where they're competing against cloud providers. We've seen all these things be very frustrating, be very difficult. And, at the same time, the traditional idea of I'm just going to build technology. It's going to be sort of my technology. I'm going to, make something so amazing that people will just love it. Essentially sort of proprietary business models. We haven't seen a whole lot of those lately. Now, I say that we haven't seen a whole lot of those lately, except when the business model is SaaS. And so SaaS has proven itself to be relatively successful. The challenge with SaaS is that SaaS looks somewhat like software development, in that, software development always used to be based on the idea of, huge amount of capital or investment up front. You build the technology, educate the market, you get people using it, and then subsequent, next iterations of software are essentially sort of free because so much of it has been, put into that sort of original cost, but then the next incremental cost of shipping that next license, that next, piece of software is essentially, next to zero. And the business model sort of, stretches out those costs then over long periods of time. SaaS is a little bit different in that you have to, build the service. The service is running on top of the cloud. Your cloud meter bill is running whether or not you've got, customers or not. And so we are seeing some very, very interesting ways of, people building the back ends of SaaS services to be much more cost effective, right? And we've seen them using various types of technology that are, much, much better metered. They're not necessarily like turning things on. It's, it's based on serverless, or it's based on WebAssembly, or it's based on whatever. But it's still it's sort of a different model than traditional software has been. And so it does sort of bring up the question of, with software being so critical to all the things we do, sort of all of the, the quote unquote digital transformation that's gone over the last decade, 15 years, but more importantly, just the idea that most business decisions these days, for the most part, are software decisions, right? They're technology decisions, right? So they're, somebody says, hey, I have an idea for something. There's a certain amount of technology that's at the other end of that, whether it's how you interact with your customers, how you interact with your partners, how you're interacting with data in order to make decisions, how you're collaborating with colleagues, all those sorts of things. Software isn't going away in terms of being critical to, how businesses are run, how nonprofits are run, how, universities are run, all those sorts of things. But we are running into a situation in which the people who are building and maintaining software is, are struggling to figure out the business models, right? So my question to the broader audience is, are you seeing other things out there, other business models, other ideas about how to, not create, super wealth around software, but how to create sustainable types of things, right? Because the argument, the flip side of it is, well, open source sort of does this, but we still see open source communities constantly saying, look, we need funding in order to, to handle maintainers. And we need, people are being burned out who are being maintainers and contributors. And they, these projects in which you sort of throw a few bucks here, throw a few bucks there to sort of help maintainers haven't worked out either, right? So I feel like to a certain extent, we're kind of at a crossroads in which, a generation of people have now gotten used to the idea that you shouldn't necessarily have to pay for software, right? Because open source has been there and it's been the foundation and backbone for a long time. But when they think about software in terms of, does it support and maintain businesses and activities that generate wealth or generate value? Let's focus on value, not wealth. The money isn't necessarily there. And so I wonder, as an industry, what other mechanisms are people thinking about in terms of, how do we bring together enough good engineers, be able to create some sort of economic model in which there is, money to support, whether it's open source maintainers or whether it's the companies that are building it, or, whether it's, lower cost ways of building things on top of the cloud, hence, like the sort of the factory underneath it is it a more efficient way, what will happen there? So that's the piece I'm very, very curious about with today's Sunday Perspective is, are there companies out there that we're not aware of that are looking at new ideas for this, right? Sort of analogous to, way back in the day, you would have, like in the chip manufacturing part of the world, you would have these, huge sort of fabs that would have to build chips. So people like Intel and AMD and others would spend billions and billions of dollars up front, what looked like very much the software model. And then they would build chips. They would sort of capture most of the value for building chips. And then over time, those became so expensive to build, and they took so long to kind of get done. You had things like some of the manufacturing, TSMC and others, came along in lower cost areas, or they took a very different business model approach in which, they were just looking at different aspects of the chip industry. And we now have things like contract manufacturing, and you've got the ability to, do sort of third party ways of building stuff. And so I'm wondering if software is going to have its hardware moment, if you will, in terms of business models, right? Is there somebody out there who is going to look at the model today, whether it's how innovation is originally created, how innovation is sustained over time, right? Does there just become somebody who, creates some sort of function, I'll call it a company, if you will, that will look at older projects the same way that people like TSMC might look at, some of the chips that are less high tech and go, there's a model there. There's value there that people want in terms of sustainability or long-term support or whatever. And I'm going to start by, funding those types of things. But I'm very curious if that will happen, because the other thing I'm very curious about, I saw a comment this week from a venture capitalist named JJ Jacks, or Joseph Jacks, JJ. We've had him on the show before. And he said, the people that are, even the projects or the people that are building these, software available, software sort of visible, right? So the idea of like, well, it's not open source in that you can take it and run with it, but it's software available from a licensing perspective. So you can see what's going on in there. He said people are just going to, run AI models against that. They're going to have the AI models, modify them in such a way, whether it's in, the type of language that it's written in or whatever it is, such that they're going to be able to basically get around your idea of, well, I'm making the software visible, but it's not available for doing things. And they'll just turn it into open source. And so, I wonder, even the protections that we put around licensing with things like open source, if they are going to continue to be viable. And JJ's statement might be completely in violation of the laws and so forth, and the legality of certain licenses. But the concept seems like it's something that's probably going to happen. People are going to look for ways to get around that, to get access to innovation, to quote unquote steal innovation, whatever it might be, to mimic it or copy it or whatever it might be. So, as I think about all these things, the software industry is still doing well. Right now we're, kind of going through some economic challenges because obviously things are changing and buyers are going through different things. And, but I do wonder if there are new models out there, right? We've been 15, 20 years of some of these models, whether it's SaaS models or open source models or whatever it might be. Are there new models out there that you all are hearing about, that you're experimenting with? We would love to hear about them because I think, software is still very, very much foundational in our industry. It's very much, foundational to how innovation is getting brought to life, if you will. And, figuring out, how those efforts are going to be sustained and to motivate people enough through profitability and so forth to want to keep doing innovation, I think is really, really interesting. It's difficult, but I'm curious if you're seeing, new things start to emerge. And I don't necessarily mean like industry completely taking over things, but new ideas that are even finding little niches in there. So, anyways, with that, I'm going to kind of wrap it up. Like I said, seeing a few of the changes to various parts of the industry, and again, seeing pushback on people saying, "Well, if you change your licensing model, we're not going to go to something else. We're going to abandon working with you anymore." And I understand that. I understand the frustration around trust and things like that. But I do wonder, are we reaching points where a whole generation of people has sort of become used to the idea that software is free, free as in, economically free. And we, unless you are, a monopoly like an Apple, but even in those cases, the marketplaces where they take 30%, like if the products don't cost anything, we devalue the developers that build it, all those sort of things. Like what sort of comes out of this stuff. So would be very, very interested. If anybody is starting to see some interesting new business models, please reach out to us. Send us a note. show@thecloudcast.net is our email. You can hit us up on Twitter or any of the other social medias. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear even just ideas you have about where this is going. So anyways, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. As always, hope you're having a good week. Hope, if you're listening to this on a Sunday, it kicks off your week. You have a good week. I've got a couple more of these sort of open-ended questions coming up in the next couple of Sunday perspectives. So hopefully it'll give us some stuff to think about. Maybe have Thanksgiving dinner conversations with your relatives as opposed to talking about politics or some other thing that, causes frustration. So anyways, hope you're all doing well. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the community. Thanks for giving us feedback in all the places you listen to the podcast. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.